I'm Andrew.
Ankur, Rungta.
My name is Dennis O'Malley.
My name is Krista, Raymer. Is this a race to the bottom with discounts, or is there an actual opportunity to build a business that includes discounts? Do our prices have any integrity if we mark them down and leverage discounts in the way that we have in more mature markets? At what point do discounts show up as a market matures? Is there a TSN turning point or a moment in time where we see discounts become more applicable within the business?
It's not the same story everywhere, and the way that people discount can vary a lot. We debate a lot. Are you going with a percentage discount or some other way of communicating it? Are you trying to go with everyday low prices that are conveying the value to the consumer? To me, what I see is that the consumer wants to have value delivered to them or perceived value delivered to them.
One thing I would also say is kind of a thesis we've developed watching California Discount develop is half of all discounts are product related in some way, or supply side driven. So there's always the aspect of, in a world in which distributors are setting prices, new harvest supply goes up a lot. You would expect discounting to happen to drive the price down to a more of a market price, and that can either be people trying to liquidate inventory, or it can be like new brands trying to do BOGOs to undercut. A lot of that kind of stuff. It's just like a dynamic that we saw play out in California pretty closely.
If you ask people who owns pricing and then who owns product, you generally get a long, uncomfortable pause. And so the actual ownership of pricing discipline and pricing strategy, especially when you're comparing first-party products and third-party products, isn't well defined, isn't well owned. Nobody has a KPI from that. Everybody has a basis of what they should be doing and what other competitors are doing, and especially when it gets into omni-channel. But when you have a basis where first-party and third-party products that you're trying to assess what the margins are, it's just a real challenge. And so most of the retail folks may not have control over all the evergreen discounts, and they have control over maybe not even vendor-funded discounts or vendor discounts, but maybe just promotional calendars. So I think the challenge is, starting off, even in a new market, are you empowering with the people that actually are running that commercial business with the ability to either partner or own a pricing and product strategy? And that's what I see as the fundamental challenge, even in newer markets where you do have really, really good margins.
I think it's important to distinguish in this also that there are three levers that kind of get grouped under your discount line, either in reporting or on your POS. And that is that it reflects the efforts that you took around your promotional calendar. It reflects the efforts that you took to move slow-moving inventory through markdown, as well as encompasses things like loyalty programs, student discounts. So those are actually three very distinct levers that don't get differentiated when we talk about discounts as a whole. Because if we do dig into that, discounts actually show up quite differently than based off of where the market is. And it isn't necessarily only in trying to attract new customers. It's also in trying to get slow-moving inventory out. And that's something that you've seen.
For example, in Michigan, which is a very competitive marketplace, the discount advertising is super aggressive. So it's 40% off the store. It's, free weed. That's been the big new billboard campaign throughout Michigan, is a bunch of the large players have literally their billboards say free weed. But if you go into the store, it turns out you only get free something if you're first time, if you're this, if you're that. But most people aren't actually getting the benefit of the discount, or they're comparing it against some other offering, which is actually a better price than what was advertised to them. So I think there's a lot of that type of noise in the marketplace. We have always historically gone with a more simplified approach of like what we call everyday low pricing. Because in our minds, it's like, okay, if you've got a $75 ounce, so that's what the customer wants, and just tell them you have a $75 ounce. Don't tell them you have a $100 ounce that's 25% off, because maybe they're not gonna, connect the dots there. But what we've seen is that unfortunately some people want the percentage off, right? So now you've got the best price on something, but you're not communicating it in a way that gets people excited. And so I think that's often the challenge that we face. You may be trying to do something that's good for the consumer, but there's so much noise around you too from the competition that if you don't play that game, then your messaging gets lost in the shuffle.
It just started by providing visibility to the team that said, we have to run at a 60% gross margin or we don't survive. Discounts have to be under 12% or we don't survive. Of those 12% discounts, half of of those have to be vendor funded or we don't survive. What started the funnel in terms of how much we knew we needed to cut out of OpEx. We cut back weed maps, focused on our first party. I see one of the thought leaders around there, but it was really investing in our first party customers to be able to actually prevent a lot of the discounting on that. It's really limiting in terms of loyalty points about what you can do, but on a loyalty basis, we've generally focused at about a 2% effective discount rate on loyalty. Is what we found generally works. We A/B tested on sites to see if the 10% to 20% new customer actually worked or not. It dramatically works. We found that we needed to be between 20 and 30% on a new customer basis, that to actually capture somebody on a pickup or delivery. If you take that off, people drop because they want a deal.
I think what we found is that some people use discounts in a way that's too broad and hits a lot of their existing business that they already have. The last thing you want to do is offer a discount to a customer that you didn't need to offer a discount to. To me, I love the new customer discount because it's a very specific targeted effort to bring new people into the door. You're not cannibalizing your existing sales that way. I think that when you roll out other types of discounts, it can be more problematic, particularly if they're really broad and store-wide. Because I can tell you, places like Michigan, Massachusetts, very competitive. So when people are trying to fight for new customers, they think that they're offering the discount to entice a new customer, but in reality, they're just reducing their margin on existing in-place sales. So it's a really tricky balance there to try to fight those things. So for me, discounting, there's a competitive aspect to it with other licensed dispensaries. So you're obviously trying to always fight for customers in mature markets. I think you're also really trying to entice the illicit market customer. That is enough. Like for me, in places like Michigan, Massachusetts, we've seen major inflows of people from the illicit market into the licensed market because prices have gotten low enough, discounts are strong enough, and so who's your audience? As Krista always talks about, segmenting different parts of the funnel, different targets out there, and so if you're targeting the illicit market, it may be a very different play than if you're targeting your competitive dispensary.
If a discount is at the end of the day just a pass through of a market price, right? Basically, what you're saying is like the market price, particularly when you consider the illicit market, is just 20% off of what it is, and there's a behavioral aspect. It almost kind of begs to question if you're solving for gross margin and you need to do it in order to hit the market price, if it's fine. At the end of the day, perhaps the market needs all of that in order to actually adapt to the fluctuations.
I think there is a market price. There's an equilibrium that markets hit, and so we can discount each other into oblivion, but if that's where the market's at, I mean, these are commodity products, or for the most part, they're commodity products, so you can't fight the market too much.
What do you think is better in a case in which a consumer comes into the store and says, I want a pre-roll? That bud tender immediately says the highest price pre-roll that is undiscounted, or immediately says the pre-roll that's currently on the discount vendor-led inventory for that day?
You haven't asked enough questions to the customer yet. You can't make a recommendation yet.
I think what you're getting at is how do you figure out whether they want value or premium, or do they want quantity or single unit? So I think there's an art to asking those questions the right way, but you need to glean that information to be and again, if your deal sheet has 100 deals on it and it would take somebody an hour to read through it, then you need to be able to point them in the right direction. I mean, we have so much noise in the stores, right? We're always trying to simplify. Okay, we have hundreds of SKUs, dozens of deals. How do we get that across to the customer? Because they're confused. There's a lot of brands out there. There's not great information. How do you communicate it to the customer? And not just in store. We're looking at our website right now saying our deals page is really cluttered. It's really hard to follow. It's on multiple, you got to click through multiple pages. If you have great deals, but they're buried on page 7, maybe nobody sees them. So how do you communicate it? So it's about organizing the information in a way that's easy for people to understand and not overwhelming them.
Who makes the promo decision? Who needs to be at the table to have these discount conversations?
Going back to the fundamentals, before you even get there to be able to say, let's even just take gross margin before you can even go do discounts. Is your gross margin different between your first party products and your third party products? Are you using a product margin? Are you using a COGS optimized margin? Are you putting overhead on your first party margin, first party products, but not your third party products? I mean, you have to have a baseline economics of the business before you can even give somebody the guidelines to be able to go do that. In my experience, I found that there's a lot of power to be able to empower the actual GM to have some portion of what that promotion calendar looks like. But we've often struggled in terms of saying there is a content need, so come up with some good ideas. And then there's an amplification need, which is once I have a good idea, how do I tell the world about it? And so to me, the stores have generally relied on marketing to come up with the good idea, and then they internalize it, approve it, everything else, and then they go back to marketing and they say, okay, we agree with this idea, we can operationalize it, let's go out and go do that. But I think one of your points is that in an S&OP process on it, right, there should be somebody from inventory having some input to be able to say, hey, you know what, we are ending lifing this SKU, or this SKU is now like a hanging chat and we need to get it out of there. So there should be somebody who owns inventory is also responsible for that SKU rationalization of it.
For us, we've approached it very differently, where marketing is really responsible for the execution, but we generate the ideas through our buying team, through our planning team, and then even we as the leadership of the company are very involved in some of this stuff, maybe more than we should be. But to me, the way the sausage gets made is as critical as like how the sausage turns out. You know, you need to have the right people weighing in on it, but you do need to have ownership. And so we had a debate about whether it should sit with buying or with planning, or whether it should be some kind of a joint effort. We've tried to empower our buying team actually a lot, especially in a very competitive, open wholesale market, you know, like Michigan, like Massachusetts, even Missouri's like that now. The buying and the assortment creation is as critical as anything. And so to me, the people that have the closest pulse on what's going on in the wholesale market and where the trends are should have a huge amount of input on then what the deals are that are being offered.
I would say the mechanism of first and foremost having like a discount budget based on a gross margin solve and always making sure that you're attaching it to that, I think is like fundamental. I think there's a lot that we can know in basically price elasticity of demand of discounting, which we have a good amount of data on. But, you know, you can kind of get caught up in thinking about that. And then, you know, after you're done, you have still a mess of discounts and you're losing margin. Setting that baseline is important. In the data, when it comes to looking at a thing that's discount sensitive or not, and it comes to the response on that, it's fairly explicit and fairly fast. If something like a brand in particular is discount sensitive or not, you will see, like Jeter's a great example, right? You run 20% off Jeter, you will see a tripling of sales that day. And then you can fairly quickly figure out, well, you know, what was the effective margin I lost on that? There are a lot of brands that will not triple when you run a discount. You know, it's fairly simple exercise to just take a look at your top 5 brands and some discounts you ran and just look at the multiple of sales that increased on that day or those days to understand, is this a discount sensitive brand or not? Because the disparity is very wide. You will see some that doesn't do shit. You will see others, like I said, that it will triple, quintuple the sales on that day.
What is the threshold of a discount that somebody is excited about and changes behavior? Is there any value in the 0 to 20% off? 0 to 20% off doesn't drive any significant velocity change, and therefore you're actually just giving back dollars or gross margin dollars back to the customer. It's at 20% off that we see a significant change in where velocity is, and it gets much more serious at 40% off. So it's also like, when do you use those levers?
We see, you know, those heavier discounts being offered around holidays a lot. So 420, 710, that's a major, I think, tool that people use to try to drive traffic. And my view is, and I don't know that I have specific numbers to back this up, but it feels like when we used to do a lot of that, we would get a spike in traffic around that holiday. It would be at very low gross margin or flat or negative gross margin in some cases. And then we'd see a corresponding fall off in demand either before or after that period. And so then you would look at your entire broader period and you'd say, well, I'm really just kind of flat on revenue. My margin's way down because I discounted heavily. And I basically attracted all these customers that aren't really sticky because they're just discount shopping and trying to get the best deal on a particular day. So I don't know if I really answered the question, but I personally feel like I like that. I like the heavier discounting in the clearance scenario because the last thing any of us want is inventory write-offs. But that to me is a specific way to use a heavier discount to just get something to move very quickly before it becomes obsolete. But when it's used as part of like a promo calendar or around a holiday, that to me feels very counterproductive in the grand scheme of things, and it may solve a desire to show a lot of traffic on a particular holiday, but it doesn't feel like it's value add sort of business.
I think it goes back to just the consumer view in terms of what you have to take a look at, right? And so we're seeing things today, which now there's service fees and there's credit card fees and ATM fees and everything else. And so the out the door price for a consumer, you always have to keep in mind what that is. But again, in our small store in San Francisco, what worked for us is really doubling down on products that drive brand loyalty. I mean, as Andrew said, Jeter has brand loyalty. We found product sets like Level and Kiva and Jetty, and this movement towards call it live rosin, which we think is solventless, is going to be a big deal. We found a lot more brand loyalty, and we don't have to discount. And then we there's definitely a difference between evergreen discounts and very focused discounts. But, back at Cleva, we did, again, price A/B testing on our weed, and we said, okay, should we hard mark this down by 20% and see if that changes, or should we just do a 25% discount? It's very hard to ever increase prices, so we were never successful of going to hard mark and then going back up. So that never happened well. But in another scenario, in a large delivery company in California, we experimented with two things, which was a tax-free day, which was essentially 35% off, or a day that was 25% off. And actually for us, it was much more profitable to do the 25% off because our volume went up and consumers couldn't do the math and didn't know that that was a 35% off deal. And oh, by the way, we had a heck of a time actually trying to reconcile the figures when we knew we had to pay taxes, but we didn't change the customers.
If your discounts are not differentiated in the POS so that you can't track them properly, like that's one of the biggest gaps, is if you're running different discounts, you should have a lot of different naming conventions for what is being used and have rigor and consistency about when they get applied with bud tenders. And then the other portion of this is being aware of how many you're running and what frequency of time that they're running. And I personally have like a vendetta against daily deals, because daily deals just created a retraction of sales from one day to another, or manufactured demand for a product that maybe didn't actually have the demand.
If you're acquiring the brand or the inventory at net 14, net 30 terms, it's a good idea to use that period as probably the evaluation of, did this discount actually help me overall, right? I think a 30-day window is fine for that as well. And I do think the point is, are you pulling demand forward, or are you cannibalizing your existing demand?